Alright, hello and welcome back to Ashgabat Cats. Let's play that. Today we're taking a look at Mortal Kombat 2. So, originally the series was called Let's Play a No-Name MAME Game, and a lot of people took issue with the fact that, hey, some of these games are actually pretty famous in their own right, and we are playing one such game. We are playing Mortal Kombat 2, the arcade fighting game that set the arcades alight back in the 90s, right here for your viewing pleasure. Welcome to the world of Mortal Kombat 2. Alright, so let's get in. Now, I don't know much about Mortal Kombat 2, but I do know Sub-Zero is where it's at. Oh, wow. Okay, so that's kind of interesting. A lot of games have maybe a tournament structure, or they kind of talk about, like, they show you vaguely what enemies you're going to face, but this is probably one of the few games that, oh my gosh, it doesn't control like Street Fighter 2 at all. This is one of the few games that kind of sets everything in like a giant tournament ladder. And it's like, okay, you're going to work your way to it. Alright. This is, wow. So Street Fighter 2 popularized the usage of special moves, where through special commands you could get pretty sweet attacks. This game kind of more or less eschews those straightforward Street Fighter Special 2 attacks, and kind of does it own with its sort of like, I don't know, down and dirty, like normal attack fights. Like, wow. This game is incredibly focused on the normal attacks, which of course means that you can use jump kicks to compensate for everything. Oh wow, okay. So we have a typical 4-button layout, it looks like. Some of the buttons are stronger than others. And then I do kind of like how when you land that heavy punch, especially that uppercut, especially that Sub-Zero uppercut, like the screen pauses for a second, there's blood, it just freezes, it just feels like you just slammed a guy. Like if you've ever played Smash Brothers, it's like landing a Falcon Punch. What is that nonsense? What a cameo. Alright. So you just keep landing those big hits and oh my gosh, it sustains you. Even if you like lose otherwise. Like, look at me, I don't know what I'm doing otherwise, but every time I land one of those heavy punches, oh my gosh, I feel like a hero. Well, I'm probably not a hero. I think Sub-Zero's a villain, right? Oh my gosh. I feel like this is a game that would be amplified distinctly by knowing all their special moves. At least Sub-Zero has a Hadoken, so we're not completely out in the water here. But he seems to be notably missing a Tatsuku Sororyuken, you know, the back quarter circle kick for Ryu. Oh geez, come on. Alright, so this is Reptile. He's like Sub-Zero but green. That's pretty much all I understand about him, but I think that's basically all the lore says about him. Like, maybe he has something exotic, like, oh, he's a ninja with the blood of, I don't know, the reptiles kind of spliced into him or something, but no, it's just green Sub-Zero. Or maybe Sub-Zero is blue Reptile. Who knows? Then again, I don't think the Mortal Kombat was ever too deep about lore. It was more about, like, punching people in blood. Wow. Okay, so I always kind of wondered, it's like, hey, how do those computers constantly do that punching me a lot attack? That doesn't seem to be quarter circle forward, half circle back, anything. No, you just press strong punch a whole bunch of times, and then you too can be a spam martial artist. There are obviously no other colors for Sub-Zero because that would completely defeat the point of having a bunch of palette swap ninjas on your roster. Like, I mean, come on, I get that you have to pad your roster space out, but it's like, at least make them look a little different, because it's like, yeah, Street Fighter 2 had Ryu and Ken, but like, they sort of had their, like, more noticeable differences. Like, Ryu wasn't just like a red Ken. The other way around. Ken has his own kind of like messy hair, he kind of has his own like unkempt style, whereas Ryu, well, I mean, okay, Ryu's like basically a traveling hobo, so of course he has an unkempt style, but he seems weirdly more put together, whereas like Ken, he seems like the kind of guy who would dress himself in a hurry, if that makes any sense. Whereas Ryu, well, I'm pretty sure Ryu would maybe take more care in dressing himself. It's just he would wear the same ratty thing day in, day out. And then also, too, there were the gameplay differences, although I'm not going to argue that Sub-Zero and Reptile play exactly the same. I also kind of like how... Well, okay, so yes, this is a down and dirty, brutal fighter, but then the backgrounds kind of reflect that sort of, like, weird aesthetic of it. Like, fighting games, by and large, were influenced and perhaps living in the shadow of Street Fighter 2, and so they borrowed, like, all the aesthetics and whatever else. And so they kind of took that aesthetic of, like, real-life kind of backstreet brawls and that sort of thing, which, I mean, there's nothing against that. That was cool. It's just that, like, that leads to a lot of games that all kind of look the same. And then with one of them being able to say, it's like, hey, no, I was the first, then it's like, well, it's a bunch of imitators. But you get a game like this, and it's very clearly set in some sort of weird, surreal fantasy zone. Check out that monk on the left, who evidently met a very unfortunate fate with some vines. And you can just see, like, where are we right now? We're in, like, some warlord's armory. It's like a bunch of weapons in the background. It's like, why? Just cause. That's how they roll back then, or in this place. I don't think this was meant to be any sort of time period. Maybe, I guess in the vaguest of senses, this is like some sort of future dystopia where only the strong rule. Of course, that being said, if that was true, where's the Fist of the North Star guy? Alright. This is the part in the video when I start, like, taking a look at what I've been doing and realizing it has not been working. Sub-Zero, I believe, is a cool character, but I believe he's so cool because you eventually fight him in the campaign and he just wrecks your stuff. And so every kid puts this game in their Genesis, because obviously you couldn't buy the Super Nintendo version because there was no blood, and if there's no blood, no buy, right? Anyway, they would stick it in their Super Nintendo, and they'd all choose the coolest one. Oh, that is pretty cool, actually. So check out the background. There are little mini fighters having like another match. And somewhat hilariously, it looks like Green Liu Kang versus, I don't know, Reptile on Fire. So, if I was being exceptionally charitable, maybe they're actually, in fact, based off of the fighters you're doing right now. Now, one thing that's interesting about this series, so, yes, the fighters themselves are FMV, and I believe this was notably one of the best FMV games. And then also, it was an FMV fighting game, and it kind of created that entire genre. But what's interesting is looking at the backgrounds, that is some really nice sprites. Like, especially check out that mountain. Like, it's beautiful. There's, like, shadows and shading, and there's a ton of different colors. Everything's in a gradient. It looks downright amazing. And so I think it's always kind of weird that, like... Well, I think it's weird that you typically think about this game as sort of an FMV game, but there's a lot of cool sprite work in the background. Although that being said, like, take a look at the giant vortex in the background. So, I mean... Yeah, the vortex, like, I mean, maybe they didn't do that effect in Paint, or maybe they didn't do that effect with, like, just raw pixels. Maybe they took, like, their image editor and kind of did a typical swirl. But take a look at the mountains, like, very in the background. You could, like, almost see them if you squint. Now that is some quality sprite work. And so, unfortunately, I think it's more like the cheap Photoshop-y, although did they even have Photoshop back then? Swirls that we kind of, like, associate with Mortal Kombat, but... There's a lot of sprite, and especially the detail work in the stones in the front. Like, that is pretty cool. And then you've got the dragon. Well, the dragons are probably real-life motion, but... Like, for example, that mountain. It's like, they didn't sample that from there. You can't take pictures like that. No, that was all hand-created. So, there's some cool stuff going on here. I guess, yeah, I can kind of see why this set the arcades alight. There's definitely something here. Now, of course, it's also a hard-as-nails, possibly very unfair fighting game. So I can also see why, with a lot of blood, that sort of revels in the blood, I guess. Like, if you made sort of a street fighting game that was kind of like... It sort of dealt with maybe the darker sides of street fighting. Like, if you've ever read the manga Holy Land, basically it's about, like, this kid who kind of... He's like... bothered by bullies, so he just kind of trains in his room, and he does this one punch, and he does this punch over and over and over. He does this one punch like 1,000 times, 10,000 times, and so he's like real good at this punch. And so, you know, stuff happens, thugs fight him, but then he whips out his punch, and he like completely wrecks that guy, because like, again, he's practiced this one punch to perfection. Kind of goes to the old Bruce Lee saying, it's like, I don't fear the man who knows who's practiced 1,000 punches once. I fear the man who's practiced one punch 1,000 times. And so he kind of gets more and more into this whole like underground fighting scene, and he's like having like street fights every day, and like eventually it just gets kind of worse and worse for him. I mean, you can't be like a professional fighter in real life and expect things to work out great at the end. And so if you had a video game that kind of like explored that sort of concept, then it's like, okay, yeah, having blood, it's like that would kind of emphasize that what's happening, this sort of damage that's happening to these characters is like real in a sense. But then you get a game like this where it's like blood's everywhere, and it's kind of like, let's just kind of have a bloody good time, and it's like, yay, blood. It's like the Halloween kind of fake blood, and it's like, I don't know, it kind of cheapens it, you know? It's like seeing blood in real life. It's like, well, that's not an everyday occurrence. At least I sure hope it's not for you. Usually you only see blood when something has gone very, very bad. And so checking out the blood here, it's everywhere. I mean, it's like splat. It's like it's not even doing anything specific. Oh yes, the fatalities. I don't know. Personally, I've always thought the fatalities were maybe a little bit distasteful, although again, I'm not into that sort of like over gore that this game sort of seems to revel and delight in. Although I will say the fatalities are kind of a fascinating concept, because each fatality is activated by a completely obscure, inane sequence of buttons, but then it results in this like cool thing. And so you get like kids everywhere just kind of learning and memorizing and like setting to heart these cool fatalities, and then they like spread them around and they learn like other ones, and it's like this was all in the days before the internet, so I'm not even sure how these kids even figured it out in the first place. So the fact that they could even like figure them out and then share them so effectively, it's like that's crazy. That's impressive. It kind of goes to show you that it's like, even though in the past there was not quite a thing as the internet, if things were cool enough, people would in fact share them. Well, I mean, the internet existed, but like Google at large perhaps did not. And so maybe you knew to go to hamsterdance.com if you wanted a good time, but if you wanted to get all the fatality codes for, I don't know, Reptile or something, then you're not necessarily going to be able to just go to Google and type it all in. Oh. Every time. And then those clouds. There's some parallax scrolling going on, which is always the hallmark of a nice game. Although I think by this time they kind of had that stuff just down pat. Like, they've got like the Matrix coprocessors or whatever, so they tell it, it's like, hey, just do some double scaling, and it's like, yeah, sure, no prob. It's not quite like the early 80s games where they had to sort of program it in if they wanted to do it even. Yep. Mortal Kombat 2. I don't know. It's an interesting game because it's this kind of game that's on like everybody's subconscious. It's definitely enshrined in the collective subconscious. But I think if you asked somebody like why specifically they liked it, they may not be able to give you a very deep and meaningful reason why. I mean, maybe they're like, ooh, it was cool, you could beat people up, or oh, there was blood. And it's like, it's kind of interesting how something became so ubiquitous, but then for just such, well, primal reasons, I suppose. Then again, I mean, like, the fact that Mortal Kombat is sort of normal attack based is, in a weird way, sort of democratizing things. So with street fighting games, like, I mean, yes, there's a very much a standard set of moves, like that Street Fighter 2 codified, but doing those half circle forwards, doing the shoryukens, it's not precisely the easiest sort of moves. And so you get a game like this where it's like you press the right like individual buttons, and then you can actually get pretty far, and maybe things kind of switch up. The other thing too is I keep noticing that my Street Fighter 2 intuition is not really like helping me out here, and I think that kind of speaks, whoa, so you press two buttons at the same time and he does something else? Again, that just like offends my Street Fighting 2 intuitions. And so you get a game that kind of changes up the language. And it's like, well, you change up the language and maybe someone else is going to like that one language a bit better. Now, oh yeah, okay, so this is Scorpion, the other one's Sub-Zero, and that's Reptile. Got it. And they are all three different people. Don't let anyone tell you otherwise. Whoa, okay. What did I do? Oh, okay, so if you down... What? If you back crouch and then press strong punch, he does not do a Sub-Zero all-in uppercut. He teleports? Like, what the heck? That wasn't in Street Fighter 2. Not even DJ could teleport. I mean, M. Bison could kind of teleport, but it was more like the jankiest, like, charge, guile charge than, like, an actual, honest-to-goodness teleport. Now, Akuma could teleport, but he like, blatantly cheats, so there's really no helping that. Well, one last character to give it a go. On one hand, I do like his color scheme the most, but on the other hand, I can already tell just by how he looks that he is very clearly, by and away, the lamest character in the game. Raiden. Oh, Lightning. That's kind of unfortunate. I wonder if they named him Raiden as sort of a riff on, like, the popular 90s shoot-'em-up game Raiden. And they're like, oh, well, this is our main competitor for quarters. Let's shame him with a name by making him lame. I think it's more just like his pseudo... What the heck? And the worst part is because Reptile turned invisible, so I don't even know if Raiden, like, teleporting all over the screen is even my doing, or if it's Reptile's doing, or if it's just a glitch in the game, or just anything. This... Yeah. He put an Englishman in New York, and he's just gonna get lost. Game over. Wow. That is just the biggest scene of death and destruction. I'd like to say I put about, I don't know, 12-ish fighters in that graveyard right there. Yep. They're all dead, aren't they? That's kind of the selling point of this game, right? It's like they die. Oh, this is even Mortal Kombat 2, so I guess there's a whole plot and/or story that this can follow up on. But I don't... It doesn't really ring a bell with me. It doesn't resonate with me. Then again, that's not to say like Street Fighter 2 had like this crazy story. I mean, at least Street Fighter 2, it's like you could summarize the story in like 2 words. It's like Bison sucks. And it's like basically Bison just goes around ruining everybody's lives. And so everybody's there either because A, they work for Bison, or B, because they want revenge on Bison. But you get like Mortal Kombat and it's like, well, this guy is this and this, and it's like... Street Fighter 2 is just so simple and clear in its characterizations. And then each character, I feel like, kind of embodies an archetype. Although, is that entirely fair to say when all games kind of followed on characters like that and sort of made them into archetypes? I guess perhaps it's not so fair, but I mean, I feel like Street Fighter 2 is like each character feels very distinct, whereas like Mortal Kombat, it's like each person is kind of based off of like a real person, like they brought in an actor to do an FMV. But like, I mean, let's be realistic. People kind of look a lot the same. Like, it's not quite like Street Fighter 2 characters where it's like, because it's animated, because it's hand-drawn, you can kind of embellish them in whatever way you want. And I mean, okay, now, that being said, like, these characters, they do have drastically different outfits, so I can partially give them credit for that. But then, they have so many of these characters, like, here's Milena and Kitana, not even Katana, Kitana, and they're the same. They're the same person, just different colors. And it's like, I feel like that kind of cheapens the whole effort to have multiple outfits. And then, like, even further, it's like Street Fighter 2. It's like each character is like very distinct gameplay-wise. It's like you don't play Ryu the same way you play Blanca. Blanca, you're just like a button-mashing master. But it's like somehow it all magically works. Whereas like Ryu, it's like you gotta be slow and deliberate and you gotta like plan your counterattacks. But when you land one, then it's like you do it. Versus like Guile, where it's like you have to be slow, patient, and methodical, but then your opponent makes any sort of wrong move and swap him. Sonic Boom, or Flash Kick, or whatever it was. But this game is kind of like, I mean, I didn't really necessarily get characterizations from it. It's like, okay, this guy punches with his fist sometimes. This guy punches with one fist, then the other fist, then the other fist, and this guy, well, some of his are kicks. But it's, I don't know. It just feels very generic. Still, a classic, arguably. And on that note, hopefully I haven't offended you and/or your childhood memories. But if I have, on that note, this cat's got a scat.